That's all right. Thank you for the introduction, Joy. As you mentioned, I'm Eric Hoffmaster, Chief Operating Officer for Innovative Computing Systems. If you're not familiar with Innovative Computing Systems, we are a legal specific technology partner. We do managed services, monitoring, 24 by 7 support, projects, and cybersecurity. And we've been serving the legal community for more than 35 years. So when you registered for the webinar, you might have seen, imagine yourself sitting on a calm beach with your feet up, sipping a margarita, enjoying the ocean. It's peaceful, still, and perfect. Only you're not on the beach. You're sitting in your office, working in complete harmony with every member of your firm through email and documents and applications. But what if you're not at your desk? What if you were, I don't know, let's say sitting on a beach or on the couch or really working from anywhere? And what if you could do this on any device? That's the essence of the innovative serverless solution, and that's what we're going to cover today. So let's go over some of the benefits. We touched on location independent. You can really work from anywhere. It's also device agnostic and work from any devices. You like PCs? Great. You want to use a Mac? Go for it. An iPad? Great. Let's do it. All right. Better yet, you can actually start on one device and then pick it up and continue on another. So you get a lot of flexibility and mobility in the solution. Also, because you're just opening up your computer and getting to work, it's going to be a simpler experience for all your employees, faster to become productive. We all like that, right? And then when you're bringing on new employees, it's faster and easier to get through them, integrate them into your culture, the technology, and get them to work, as well as departing employees. Through enhanced cybersecurity tools, we can make sure that you're doing all these great things safely and securely. Collaboration, which working in harmony with every member. Through collaboration, you can work on documents together, chats. You are working together as a firm rather than individuals. We can bring the whole team together. And then high availability and uptime, because the solution is cloud-based. You have your systems that are just working all the time. And lastly is predictable operating expense. Whereas traditional computing, you might have a large outlay of cash, capital expenditures to buy servers and storage, and network devices every 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. This solution has a low predictable operating expense monthly, so it can help with cash flow, budgeting, and forecasting. So what actually is the innovative serverless solution? So we're going to go through that. In most of our environments today, we have one or more servers that exist, right? But this is a serverless solution. So we have to talk about how are we going to get from point A to point B? How do we actually achieve operating without servers? And so it starts by understanding what is on each of the servers that is in our environment, what purposes, roles, features, functions, software is running on these. One of them might be your email server. Another might be your documents or document management system. And another might be your legal applications, practice management, time and billing, docketing, forms, whatever it is that runs your business. It might have a server involved or multiple servers. And yet you might also have other servers that run on the back end, like a domain controller that ties all your users and computers and security policies together. And you may even have one to facilitate printing to network printers. And so if we have all these servers that are running all these different functions, we have to figure out how can we move them all to the cloud so we can get rid of the servers. Right? So that might look something like this. In the innovative serverless solution, we leverage Microsoft 365, the Microsoft Cloud, to do things like host your email, as well as the domain, that system that ties the users and computers and security policies together, as well as your documents. You might have a separate document management system. You might have documents on a file share somewhere. We'll get those up into the 365 cloud, as well as collaboration using Microsoft tools to allow your firm to closely work together. And also, what I love about this is deployment. In traditional computing, you might need to buy a new computer for an employee. So you get the new computer, you either have to hand load all the applications on it or apply a firm image, log in, get it all prepared. But with the innovative serverless solution, imagine being able to buy that computer, ship it to the employee's door, they log in and just get started. Right? And in another cloud, you might have your document management system. And even in yet one or more other clouds, you might have your legal applications. I mentioned the practice management, time and billing, etc. So once you can move everything out of the servers to the clouds, we can actually get rid of those servers. So it might look something like this. Imagine you are wherever you're working on whatever device you're on, and you're operating with your email and files, your document management system, practice management, time and billing, e-discovery, all of your legal applications there, all in separate clouds, no servers. That's where you get the benefits of that freedom of mobility, high uptime, everything that we talked about. Once you can get rid of the servers, you're free. But since we're moving all of your data and all of your applications to one or more clouds, well, how do we keep it safe and secure? And so I think we really need a deep dive into security, right? How do we keep secure once we're in a cloud environment? So let's first touch on what traditional security looks like. Imagine that you're in a traditional office building where your employees are congregating together into one office building to work together. It might look something like this. This rectangle represents the four walls of your office building. And here you're sitting here. Literally, you could walk down the hall and your server's right there, right, within your four walls. And then to get to the internet, you're going to go through a firewall, a security layer before you get out. And in traditional computing, most of your cybersecurity threats or vulnerabilities or attack vectors, they come from one of two locations. The first being right here from the outside, trying to get into your security layer, into your firewall to access your data, your servers. Number two, which is much more common these days, is attacking at the end user level. Through phishing attempts, malware, and viruses, they're trying to infiltrate at the user level to get access to that information. There's also another attack vector or threat, which is that of the physical level, right? Your physical computers as well as your physical servers. Right? Some of us might be fortunate enough to be in a high-rise building with a guard station and secure elevators and a locked door and a locked server room. But if I've seen any heist movies, I know that can be circumvented. Right? But what happens if somebody does take your laptop or your computer or takes your server? Those are threat vectors we have to be aware of and we have to solve for. But this is a serverless solution, right? So let's get rid of the server. If I don't have a server anymore, I have less of an attack surface. I have a less vulnerabilities, right? Less physical. You can't steal my server if I don't have it, right? But you also have less digital vulnerabilities because there might be less ports open on the firewall or vulnerabilities on the server, right? So theoretically, it's safer to operate in a cloud, right? But you are introducing one or more clouds, which each have their own attack vectors or threat surface. There's a lot of red here. So when we talk about keeping you safe and secure, we have to combat and eliminate all the red. And that's what we're going to cover. And by the way, if you are at home or Starbucks or a hotel, you're going to do the same thing. Here's you going out to the internet. Maybe you don't have the benefit of a hardware firewall, but the same threat still exists here at the user level and also that of the clouds. Right? So keeping safe and secure is paramount. Not only operating in the cloud just in general, but here's how we handle that in the innovative serverless solution. So what I first want to cover is physical security. We talked about stealing your server. But what does that look like in the cloud? So once you've moved your data off of your server and you've gotten rid of your server, your data or your applications now lives in the cloud somewhere. It still exists on a server. It's just not a server you manage, right? And so that server might look something like this. This is a very typical cloud data center, thousands of servers, right? And so you might have your data on one or more of these servers in this big, massive data center, right? So there is still a physical element here that I want to cover. First of all, can you get into a room like this? Typically, no, not unless you're really supposed to be there. The physical access is heavily fortified and restricted. So nobody's getting into this room unless they're really supposed to be there. But what if you're supposed to be there? What if you're an employee of this company and you have access to this room? Can I walk up to that server and plug in and see your data? No. Through virtualization, think servers within servers, and encryption of the data, nobody can walk up to that server, plug in, and see any of your data. But your data still exists on that server, so what if somebody could take it? Well, the answer there again is no. Through data removal protection, nobody's going to be able to copy any of the data off of that server. Think blaring alarms and sirens. They also can't physically take the server out. And we talked a little bit about intrusion protocols. Nobody's getting in here unless they're really supposed to be there, physically and digitally, but we'll cover the digital part here in a second. It also has third-party auditing. So there's an independent company verifying and validating what this company is doing for all their security protocols. So when you look at the physical security of your server in your server room versus the physical security of a server in the cloud is magnitudes more secure than anything you might find in a commercial real estate building or your server room. So that's the physical security in the cloud. Let's talk about digital security, which is the bigger threat here. So let's assume this is you connecting to a cloud generically. It could be any cloud. It could be your document management system or your email in 365 or any of your legal applications. Right? We have to secure both the cloud and the endpoint in order to eliminate that red. Right? So we'll cover the cloud first. Here's the things that we'll do working with you to secure the cloud. By default, there's some kind of firewall or protection mechanism to prevent unauthorized access into that company's infrastructure. But that's pretty much where their responsibility ends. Once you have your data in a cloud, it is your responsibility to secure it. And here's what we can do to help. Right? First, we're going to put in multi-factor authentication. Right? Unless you can prove that you are who you say they are, with multiple forms of authentication, you're not getting into the data. And we'll also implement conditional access. Think of this like a set of checks that you have to pass before you're even allowed into the system. That could be your physical location, you're in the United States, or you have a certain software on your computer for endpoint protection, various different checks before you can even access the system. And then encryption. We talked about that on the physical level, encryption of your data at rest and in transit, as well as advanced threat protection. This is kind of a generic term for a suite of cybersecurity tools that help prevent intrusions, help prevent people from getting in when they shouldn't, as well as identity and access management. Identity being your user account, access management, the things that you have the ability to access. It's important to have a system that you know every single user that's supposed to be there, and only those users who are supposed to have access to certain things can. Right? And lastly, the security and information event management, also known as SIM. Right? We'll go over kind of what that is, but think it's looking for security events and looking for anomalous behavior. So these are some of the ways that we can turn the red into green on the cloud side. Let's cover the workstation side, the end user. And by the way, all the end user security things that we'll cover here aren't specific to this solution. They can be used in traditional on-premise or the different variety of cloud offerings. These are ways that you can secure the end user regardless of where your data is. So the first thing that we do in this solution is implement multi-factor authentication at the end user level. Right? We'll go over what multi-factor authentication is, but think I can't get into my laptop unless I have 2 forms or more of authentication. Right? We'll also do encryption at your computer level. Right? So if someone were to take your laptop, they couldn't log in and they couldn't take the data because it's encrypted. They can't do anything with it. We'll also do managed detection and response. This is a form of endpoint protection and security, think antivirus, but way, way better. And we'll go over what that is, as well as zero trust. And zero trust is a relatively new framework for cybersecurity that kind of operates by the deny everything principle unless you're explicitly allowed, with continuous checks to make sure you still are supposed to access those systems. And security awareness training. End users are the weakest link in cybersecurity. So how can we train the users to understand what bad looks like? When there's an email that has a malicious link or attachment, how do you recognize it? How do you prevent it from happening? What to do when something happens? How do you respond to something like that? So educating the end users is a big important part, as well as vulnerability management, trying to understand what vulnerabilities exist before they're even exploited and stop it. And lastly, the security and information event management, or SIEM, on the workstation level as well. So this is how we're going to kind of eliminate all the red. But I want to go into a few of these security things, these layers, and what they actually do. So let's start with multi-factor authentication. If I'm a user and I want to get access to any system, I'm going to have a password, right? Enter a password. But in a multi-factor authentication system, you need more than one method of verification or authentication. Typically, it's something you know, which is your password, and something you have, which might be a USB key or your cell phone, or even biometrics like your thumbprint, fingerprint, or Face ID, right? And once you have those two forms of authentication, then you get access to the system. And I'll say that multi-factor authentication is by far the most impactful thing you can add to your systems to increase your security posture. Of all the security systems you can implement, multi-factor authentication has the biggest bang for the buck. And this is the most simple way that you can stop a lot of these malicious attacks because they don't have that second form of authentication. Your password leaks, they don't have the form of authentication that you need, that second form. So if you don't already have multi-factor authentication, definitely recommend doing that quickly. So let's talk about managed detection and response. I call that endpoint protection or antivirus, but way, way better. So imagine your computer here is encapsulated by a layer of protection. We'll call that endpoint protection. It can protect you from the phishing, malware, and viruses. The system that we use for endpoint protection uses multiple techniques, a variety of different things to stop these threats. A big part of that is behavioral analysis. So we look at the computer and look at what normal looks like. This software can identify whenever things are abnormal. If something is happening that shouldn't happen through adaptive protection, it can identify and stop those things before they cause damage to the system. Traditional antivirus might use things like a virus signature, a known signature for a virus, so you can stop that particular virus. Well, with adaptive protection, this responds dynamically to each individual threat, to the security landscape, to what's going on your computer, and using artificial intelligence, it can stop these things, ultimately stopping what we call zero-day attacks. And this is a big one. Zero-day attacks are the scariest thing in cybersecurity. It's when an attacker, a malicious guy or girl, is out there and knows that there's a vulnerability and they're actively exploiting it before the software vendor or defenders even know it exists. They're actively in a system before anyone even realizes it, right? That's kind of a zero day. And if we can stop that, then we can prevent a lot of the damage. Even if you have a vulnerability, we can stop that. And so managed detection response has this endpoint protection as a base layer. This base layer sits underneath managed detection and response. So we build on top of that. We encapsulate it again with this extra layer of managed detection and response. And what it does is it has a team of cybersecurity experts that operate 24/7. And they're constantly looking at that antivirus software, that endpoint protection, and if there are any threats or anomalous behavior or malware or anything detected, they're going to go immediately remediate. Not only can the software help do that, but through the use of human interpretation, they can remediate it. And through notifications with us, we work collaboratively with them to ensure that endpoint stays protected. And we rinse and repeat every minute of every day. So let's talk about security and information event management, or SIEM. SIEM is similar to the endpoint detection or the managed detection or response, and that it is it's looking at the system, is looking for anomalous behavior. But whereas the managed detection response only does it on one device, your computer, SIEM will actually aggregate logs from multiple sources. Think your computer, your firewall or network devices, multiple clouds, and bring that into, again, another 24/7 security operations center manned by security experts that are constantly, vigilantly watching for anything anomalous or any threats. And they'll find those threats, threat hunting, they'll remediate it, notification to us, and we continue to work collaboratively to ensure that you stay safe and secure when operating every minute of every day. Okay, let's hit vulnerability management. So I think vulnerability management, a good analogy to that is, think you have a house, and that house has a wonderful security system. Think floodlights and cameras and sirens, alarms, the whole shebang, very tech forward, right? And you've got this wonderful security system, but you decide to keep the window open all the time. Right? Even though you have a security system, somebody could walk by and get into the window. And maybe you have a response to that. Maybe the alarms go off and the cops come, and you can respond to somebody entering the window, but the window is still open all the time, right? That's what vulnerability management aims to solve, to find the windows that are open and close them, right, before it becomes a problem. Right? So imagine this is your computer, and your computer has a bunch of different software packages running on it, right? So all of these softwares, they're written through code, and some may have some kind of vulnerability in it. And maybe not just at one point in time, but as new features are released, as certain vulnerabilities get patched, there could be new vulnerabilities introduced through any of these software packages. So your computer right now may have dozens to hundreds of vulnerabilities on it that could be exploited. Those could be windows that could be open. So it's our goal to keep vigilant and watching and understanding what are the known vulnerabilities out there, to develop a report, to meet with you, to discuss the vulnerabilities and how we're going to remediate them, and then we go fix them and rinse and repeat. Vulnerability management is kind of an ever ongoing struggle, typically done on a monthly or quarterly basis. So those are some of the cybersecurity layers that we add into the solutions to help keep you safe and secure. So then we get to the meat of it, is it right for you? All right, we talked about all the benefits and the cybersecurity around it, but is the innovative serverless solution right for you? So we do have a few requirements in order to get to this solution. The first of which is having Microsoft email, because Microsoft 365 is kind of the beating heart of the solution here for a majority of your things. We have to have Microsoft email already in there. That could be on-premise Exchange or already email in Microsoft 365. Also, Microsoft domain. I mentioned the domain controller is potentially a server. The Microsoft domain is the thing that ties all your users and computers and security policies together. Because Microsoft is kind of the beating heart of this solution, we need to have the Microsoft domain. That's either through a traditional Active Directory server or through Microsoft Entra ID, what used to be called Azure Active Directory. As long as the Microsoft domain is there, check the box. And the last one is applications have cloud offerings. Now, this is kind of a tough one. If we look at the legal industry today, there is a lot of legal software out there that operates software as a service or in the cloud. We go back 5 or 10 years ago, that number dwindles to a small handful that actually had cloud. Now, in today's world, sure, there are a lot of software that's cloud offered. There's a lot of legal software today that is not, that does not have a cloud offering. Many of those companies, those software providers, are working on modernizing and adding cloud offerings, and some not so much. So we have to look at all of the applications and see, do they have cloud offerings? Maybe that application does have a cloud offering, or maybe we have to move to a competing application to get to the cloud. And that's a different conversation. But here's what we're going to do to help navigate this, to help you understand, do you fit the requirements and how do we get from point A to point B? The first thing we do is we're going to do a discovery. We're going to look at each of the servers in the environment and determine what's on it. What function does it serve? What software is on it? Data? And then we're going to do an investigation. And the investigation is really saying, what cloud offerings are there? Can I get all my stuff to the cloud? Do I meet the requirements? And what needs to be done? Right? And then we develop a plan. We go through the planning phase and develop a migration plan. What does point A to point B actually look like? How do I get rid of my servers and achieve this serverless operating? And then we'll execute. We'll migrate you to the cloud, secure the endpoints. And then lastly, we're not going to leave you there. We're going to provide ongoing support to make sure you stay safe and secure operating in the cloud. So what's next? Well, we're going to be at the National ALA Conference next month. So come by and talk to us. We're at booth 604. I'll be there with 4 of my colleagues. We'd love to talk to you about this solution, all of our solutions and services. How can we help you? All right, stop by the booth. Opportunity number 2, Monday at 6:15. We're going to kick off the day. You see what I did there? With a high impact or low impact, high energy fitness session with iManage. Come join us for some nice exercise. Get the day started right. Opportunity number 3 is Monday at 7 p.m. We're hosting an exclusive cocktail reception with Law Toolbox and Pax8. There's only 40 slots here. So if you want to get an invitation to our exclusive cocktail reception, please come by the booth. First thing, come see us, get your invitation. And lastly, opportunity number 4, Tuesday at 10:45 a.m., I'm hosting a session. We're going to talk about life in the clouds. Can it really be this easy and secure even for law firms? All right, we'll touch on the innovative serverless solution that we talked about today, as well as other cloud, other architectures, and ways that we can modernize your firm with technology to help you be as efficient as possible. So with that said, I want to thank you. Let's move on to Q&A.
Eric, thank you so much. I have a few questions coming in, but I do want to remind everyone to go ahead and add your questions into the chat box. You can send those to everyone, and we'll get those addressed by Eric. So let's go ahead and get started with what we have. I do have a question about what if I have documents outside an application that we are currently storing on a local network share?
It's a wonderful question. Part of the migration plan is understanding where your data is and what is the best way to handle it. For some firms, it might be if you have a document management system, we can move those documents into the document management system. Or maybe the better fit is to move it up into Microsoft 365 through OneDrive and SharePoint, presented as a network drive. It's going to be case dependent. So we're going to work with you to understand what are your requirements, how do you need to store it and consume that data, and what's the best solution for you. But absolutely getting it off the server or network device, get it up into the cloud so you can eliminate those servers and achieve those benefits.
Great, thank you so much. I have a couple more coming in. Can you go through what is the traditional migration timeline, start to finish?
Yeah, that's great. It really depends, and I hate that answer, but let me qualify it. The more applications you have, the more data you have, it might take a little bit longer. It might take a month, it might take 3 months, it might take 6. If you're in the middle of a contract with a certain application and it doesn't make sense to cancel that right now, we might wait for a certain time. There are a lot of variables that go into that. So it's really not a simple answer. But what we do is during that discovery and that investigation phase, we'll build a migration plan. And that will also come with a timeline. Like, okay, if we're here to get to there, these are the steps we need to do. Here's the general timeline it'll take to get there. So it is really case dependent.
Thank you for that. Can you address this? Is ICS offering an Azure cloud solution at this point?
It's great. When we say Microsoft 365, that's kind of synonymous with Azure or Azure. All right, Microsoft Azure Cloud is is just kind of an overarching term for all the things that exist in the Microsoft Cloud, which can be email and domains and servers, virtualized servers and virtualized desktops. You know, those things also exist. And yes, we can do Azure virtual desktops and Azure servers. It's just not part of the serverless solution. They have different benefits and it's a different fit for certain firms. But yes, we do have that offering.
Thank you. And I have two questions. We'll start with this one first. For a firm starting out with improving their security environment, what one or two security features would you recommend to start with?
That's great. I love talking about cybersecurity. I'm a big old nerd, so bear with me. I think if a firm is starting out or you're kind of starting to dabble in cybersecurity, I mentioned it, but multi-factor authentication is kind of the number one lowest barrier to entry with the most significant impact, right? It's not expensive to implement, it's not difficult to implement, and the benefits you get from multi-factor authentication are the most impactful in all security. Right? So I'd always recommend multi-factor authentication. And then endpoint protection would be the second one. You know, if you're using a traditional antivirus, which might be, you know, ESET or Norton or whatever, traditional antivirus, it's been good enough for a long time, but the threats have gotten more complex and complicated. And those traditional antiviruses really can't keep up. Those traditional antiviruses wait for something to exist before they understand how to combat it. So using a next generation behavioral based antivirus, usually called endpoint protection or XDR, something like that, using one of those will help increase your security posture and safety quite a bit. So those are the two things that I'd recommend starting out with.
Thank you. And to feed off of that, I'm sure you're going to love discussing this as well. Are multiple security layers really that important?
Ah, yes. It's a lovely question. You know, hey, I've got antivirus or endpoint protection. Hey, I've got two-factor authentication. Why do I also need the vulnerability management or managed detection and response or SIEM or zero trust, right? So yes, you do need it, right? Security has to be a multi-factored, multi-layered approach. You can't just have one and done because, like I mentioned, those threats become more complicated. Certain things can slip through certain cracks. Making sure you have multiple layers will ensure that you're strengthening your armor around your firm. Because you don't want to go with just a single solution or even one or two solutions only to get compromised. And a compromise can be the absolute ruin for any company because we didn't have a third solution or a fourth solution, right? The cost of actually multi-layering security is well worth the kind of opportunity cost of loss if you do get compromised. So it's all about protecting that armor, building that multiple layered approach. So absolutely recommend it.
Thank you. And then I have a from Valerie follow up on endpoint protection. Any particular programs you recommend?
Yeah, there's a lot of vendors in this space right now, and a lot of people tout their own little niche things. We use Sophos. Sophos is our preferred provider with InterceptX managed detection response. We've been a partner with Sophos for a long time. We constantly reevaluate products, whether it's looking at the Gartner Magic Quadrant to see who's the most top right, to actually going through and looking at their offerings, looking in deep at how do they respond to attacks, how do they use AI and behavioral analysis to combat threats, and what is their insurance policy for compromise, right? And time again, Sophos takes the cake. You know, we select that because we believe it is the best solution, and we're going to continue to use
Thank you so much. And then from Jenny, what option do you have for those of us who use tabs, not a cloud app?
that. Yeah, Tabs is one of those legal applications that doesn't really exist in the cloud yet. You know, there's a lot of those. And So when we're tied to a solution, like tabs, for example, that doesn't have any option to move to the cloud, we really can't achieve a serverless solution because you still have to have a server to run that application. So then the conversation comes, okay, how critical is tabs? The answer is usually really critical. So I get that. So we can actually still retain a server in the pseudo serverless solution. It's kind of a hybrid at that point because most of your stuff is in the cloud and you can achieve most of all the benefits that we talked about. But because you have a server running a specific application, it's going to look a little different. And so we can actually go through the architecture and the design. If you still have a legacy application, we'll call it, what does that look like? It looks a little different, but not marginally so, not significantly so, rather. Uh, you can still achieve a lot of these things, but you still have to have a server. So it's going to look and feel just a little bit different. And would be happy to talk in depth about what that looks like and show you examples.
Thanks. And I'm going to have a second question that kind of feeds off of that one as well, in reference to desktop applications like Adobe. Is that something that you could talk a little bit more about as well?
Yeah. So when we talk about applications, there's kind of really two types of applications. There's ones that live on your computer that, think Chrome, Safari, Firefox, Adobe, those just operate on your local computer and they don't really have another component. Then there's a lot of other ones, Tabs example, Elite, Adoran. A lot of these have a server-side component that runs kind of the brain, and your local application on your computer connects to that brain, right? Those are the applications we're talking about migrating to the cloud. So your Chrome, Adobe, Firefox, Safari, those can still live on your local computer. Those don't have to be cloud-based because they're self-contained on your computer. And those are fine to keep where they're at.
Perfect. Thank you. And then can you talk a little bit about like what equipment can someone still use their desktop, or does it have to be laptop, or how does all that work?
That's great. What I love about this solution is that it is device agnostic. In a world where there's so many of us who want to use different types of computers, we're given the freedom of choice. So it can be a laptop, it can be a desktop, it can be a PC, it can be a Mac, it can be an iPad. Really, it does not matter what device you're using. So that is personal preference. And yes, it can be a desktop. Yes, it can be a laptop. So hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eric. I'm going to divide these questions up that just came through. So can you discuss a little bit about how you handle printing?
Yes, printing. So in a traditional environment where we have everybody working together in a centralized office, we typically have one or more network printers that everybody prints to, right? And so you usually have to have a server to facilitate that. And when we don't have a server, then you have to figure out what does that look like? If you're in a centralized office with network printers, but you're serverless, we would use a cloud-based printing solution that helps you actually send print jobs out to the cloud through the cloud back into that device, right? There are solutions that do that. Uh, a lot of people we see moving into this serverless solution are those without brick and mortar. And this tends to be not exclusively for, but it tends to be a better fit for those without brick and mortar. Works fine for those with a brick and mortar. But those without a brick and mortar who their workforce is dispersed, the printers themselves aren't centralized network printers where everybody prints to. It's the individual. And so, like on my system, I can print to my wireless printer that's sitting right here just as easily. So there's really no printing concerns unless you need a centralized print service. And then we have a cloud-based one that we can integrate to help you facilitate printing to centralized printers. Hope that made sense.
It did. Thank you. So we're going to go back to the other question Matthew put in. Is there a specific type of firm that the solution works best for?
Yeah, I touched on that. But yeah, so firms that don't have a brick and mortar, firms uh, that are dispersed, that tends to be the best fit. It doesn't mean it's the only fit, but firms that don't have a centralized office, that don't need centralized services, they fit best with a decentralized model You just go to whatever cloud and you can work. Firms that still have a centralized model where they're coming together in a physical space, this works for it as well. You have to layer in like the print services and some network drives. And there's some things to deal with when you're centralized, but it does work because it's easier when it's decentralized, when there's no brick and mortar. It's usually faster to get to the cloud because we have less complexity about having an on-premise office. So I tend to see firms that are maybe smaller, that have fewer applications, less data, less complex. This tends to be a better fit for because it's easier, but it also does work for larger firms as long as they meet the requirements.
Thanks, Eric. And I don't have any other questions right now. I am going to put the contact information we discussed earlier, just in case anyone wants to reach out directly. I've put that in the chat box for all the attendees to see. And I'm going to ask if you would like to have any closing remarks or if there are any other questions, then attendees, please go ahead and put those in the chat box.
I want to thank everybody for your time today. I appreciate you attending, and I really hope to see everybody at the ALA conference.